first of all, my name is Don Duvel, just so everyone knows who I am. I'm the Vice President of Business Services here at MaRS. It gives me great pleasure today to introduce our speaker. Tom Rand joined us about 2 months ago. We were able to lure him from the world of entrepreneurship and venture capital to become our practice lead for the Cleantech group at MaRS. Obviously, with all the work that's being done in the cleantech space right now, he's been a huge asset. Just a quick thing about his background. Tom is a very successful entrepreneur. He founded Voice Courier Incorporated, I think in the early 90s, grew it to a multinational company, and subsequently, after a handful of years, opted to sell it. He has also founded and run his own venture capital firm, focusing specifically in the clean tech industry, a handful of investments that have proven to be very successful as well. He's an Action Canada Fellow. He is the genesis behind the concept of green bonds, which was adopted by the Liberal platform in the last federal election, and sits on a whole suite of various boards and things as such. So I can't even do justice to his background, but that was my feeble attempt. So he has a very interesting topic today that he's going to speak to you about. I think it's going to be very inspiring, very invigorating. It's going to put Toronto on the map, which is very appealing for many reasons. So I will get off the stage, but without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to you our practice lead for Cleantech, Tom Rand.
Thanks, Don. It's actually a real pleasure, so gratifying to see so many people coming out to hear me talk about what is essentially a subject that's very dear to my heart. Who knew there were so many people interested in the carbon emissions profile of French lithography from 1850 to 1869?
That's next Thursday. Next Thursday.
I'll wing it. In all seriousness, it is really great to see so many people here. It's very gratifying. And as Don said, I am the practice lead of Cleantech here at MaRS. What that means in real English is that my job is to try to light a fire under the cleantech industry here in Canada. And what that means is really helping young companies grow in that sector and become global players, global leaders. And that's fulfilling the MaRS mandate in cleantech. But today, I'd like to talk about something that happened before I came to MaRS. I've only been here 2 months, and it's getting harder and harder to remember what I did before I got here. But there was life before MaRS, and there's a building just down College Street at 357 College that I and my partner, Anthony Arts, are going to be turning into what I claim is the continent's greenest hotel. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. The lessons that we've learned, as well as some of my motivation in this project, as well as being at MaRS and being in cleantech as a whole. The building you see here, when we bought it 3 years ago, it was abandoned. It was a broken shell of a building. This is what it looks like roughly today. You can see we're very near completion. I'll show you some before pictures in a moment. But my partner, Anthony Arts, who spends a lot of time in Kensington, was walking around, and he has many loves, 2 of which I am familiar with, one of which is buildings. He loves to restore buildings to their former glory, and 2, he has a real passion for running hostels, hotels for young people, hotels for travelers. And so he saw this shell of a building one day, and he had a dream. And his dream, of course, was to see this building as a best-in-class hostel with a rooftop bar, bring the building to life in a really great neighborhood where College meets Kensington, and deliver that business. So he approached me. I was running at the time my venture fund, which was engaged in cleantech, and he approached me to be a financial partner. So I said, well, it's interesting for you because you love buildings and you love hostels. Why don't we make it interesting for me? And we'll try to make it the continent's greenest hotel. And at the time, I had no idea what that really meant, although I had a vague idea. But I certainly had no idea what the guts of a building did. I didn't know what an HVAC system was or a heat exchanger. I didn't know geothermal from a hole in the ground, to be perfectly honest. And so the building, I couldn't resist. So the building also became, for me, a bit of a test bed. And so I would get my hands dirty, and I did get my hands dirty for a couple of weeks at the beginning of the project. But the idea is to really learn from the ground up, from a grassroots level. I'm a very practical entrepreneur. I build companies from the ground up. And I thought it would be a great way to find out what technologies can deliver in this sector. So it would guide some of my investment principles for my fund, and it did. And so today I want to talk about some of the motivations behind this project and what we've learned. And for sure, if I'm going to make the claim that this is the greenest hotel in North America, I'd better know what I mean by green, and I better define it quite narrowly. And green is used a lot, as we know. I mean, it's good dish soap that doesn't have phosphates in it. It's a low-flow shower head, recycled toilet paper, organic granola. I'm very fond of organic granola, not so much the recycled toilet paper. But these are all green products, right? And part of the case that I'd like to make today, and I've been accused, and often quite fairly, that I see the world through a singular lens these days, and that lens is low carbon. And there's a reason for that. We all know about climate change. The world is beginning to understand the depth and ferocity of this problem. I think what we're just coming to terms with in the public sphere is the pace and severity at which this problem is coming. So to put a context on how far down the road we are and how late we are in responding, no less than the Iron Lady back in 1989, and no one can accuse Margaret Thatcher of being a shill for the environmental movement, certainly not an alarmist of things environmental, but the Iron Lady herself said in an address to the General Assembly in 1989, and you could read it too, climate change could alter the way we live in the most fundamental way. It is life itself that we battle to preserve. It is not, of course, the planet that cares about warming. The planet will do its thing. What matters, and what's really becoming a focus, is whether or not we're going to be able to feed ourselves in 20 or 30 or 40 years, and whether we're going to be able to maintain the lifestyle and the population level to which we have become accustomed. And if you think this is alarmist to sort of put it in this sort of way, it's not. I would urge you to read the latest books by the likes of Wynne Dyer or James Lovelock, or best of all, because he is very well respected, is Sir Nicholas Stern, who was the UK's advisor to Tony Blair on climate change. He's now at the London School of Economics. These are not alarmists. These are deep thinkers, and they have gelled the science, and they understand that we are very close to passing a point where we turn our bread baskets into deserts. That includes Mexico, Central America, the Midwest United States, China, Japan, Australia. So the point I'm making is that if green has anything to do with sustainability and protecting ecosystems, it had better be dealing with the carbon problem, and it had better be dealing with it in a pretty significant way. And I will talk about significance in a moment. And so part of what I'm accusing greenwash of is if you're not dealing with carbon in a significant way, you're not playing in the big leagues, and it's greenwash. If that's not enough reason to take action, Angela Merkel about 3 years ago made the explicit claim that Cleantech, and for her, Cleantech is low carbon, a transition to a low carbon economy, sees it as the third industrial revolution, right? Steam engine, oil, now low carbon. And in my view, the low carbon economy, low carbon technology is today what silicon was back in 1960. And if any country wants to participate in the next economic revolution, they had better start dealing with clean tech, and they'd better start dealing with it quickly. Europe is leading the way, and they're kicking our butt in clean tech, and there's a reason for that. They've taken this issue seriously for a lot longer than we have. What are our global targets? What do I mean by significance? Well, as the political responses and the political dialogue begins to align with scientific realism, right? You can only spin so much the numbers that you'd like to meet. Reality has a way of biting you in the ass. So that's what's happening. And you now hear Obama, Merkel, Gordon Brown, Sarkozy. They are all now talking about cuts in the order of 50 to 80% by 2030, 2050. And they're talking today, you read in the papers, they're talking about trying to limit it to 2 degrees. There's a reason for that. You go past 2 degrees, and we are in no man's land, and we are in danger of losing our food supply. If you talk to Jim Hansen, who heads up NASA's work on climate modeling, climate change, he would say it's 80% by 2030. We're already committed to 2 degrees. So the point I'm making is that the kind of changes we need to make are significant, and the resources that we need to bring to bear in all sectors are the kind of resources that we normally attribute to a war. So if you're not going to be addressing that, you're not green. My point is that green is reduction in energy use and carbon emissions, or production of renewable energy. That's equivalent. If you're not doing it, you're not green. And buildings, which is what I'm here to talk about today, to make this specific, I'm not here to lecture anymore about climate change. I'm here to talk about a solution. Buildings are responsible in our large urban centers for between 1/2 and 3/4 of our carbon emissions. That's not constructing the buildings. That's operating the buildings on a day-to-day basis. That's a huge, huge part of our footprint. It's 40% overall, much more in the urban centers. One can imagine why. So if we're not going to address buildings, then we're not going to address climate change. It doesn't mean we don't address transport and animal husbandry and forestry and all the rest of it. But buildings will have to be dealt with. And part of what I want to try to convince you of today, I mean, a lot of people know this, but it's not widespread yet, but buildings are the lowest hanging fruit as far as I can tell. We can reduce the emissions in buildings by 75%. I'm going to show you how. And we can do it building a clean tech economy, and we can do it without spending a dime. And if you think I'm selling this Florida swampland, hold your fire till the end, because we can. So buildings, I think, should be the first target, and we should get on with it, and I'm going to show you how we can do it. When I describe this very narrow view of green, right, it's carbon. And organic granola is great, and it should also be included, but it's not sufficient. Carbon is what is sufficient to be called green. I was accused actually one night by one of my friends at the Toronto Atmospheric Fund that I wasn't taking into account water use. And while I certainly agree that access to water will be an issue in years to come, her point was that, there's an enormous amount of energy put into treating water and distributing it. And I thought, oh, maybe you're right. Turns out that water is only 2.4% of our electrical consumption in Toronto. So it's an issue, no question. It's an issue for the city because it's a huge part of the city's energy bill. But on a building-by-building, ongoing basis, it's not the lowest hanging fruit. So although we should certainly install low-flow shower heads, this is not going to get us there. So what is our target at Planet Traveler? Let's get more specific. Well, when I set this target of a 75% reduction in carbon emissions from business as usual, I had absolutely no idea if it was attainable or how much it would cost or how you would do it. I was just working backwards from what we need to do. We need to reduce our carbon emissions by roughly 75–80%. So why don't we set that as a target and try to hit it and see what happens? It turns out we can hit that target. Even better, it turns out we can hit that target with technologies that are already available and already proven and that pay for themselves. Right? There's a payback period, and I'll talk about that. But you can reduce a building's energy use by 75%, and it won't cost you a dime because you can be cash flow positive on day one. Why aren't we doing this everywhere? I don't know. That's part of why I'm having this talk, is to try to make that happen. So before I talk, I want to sort of talk briefly about, there are a number of institutions and standards that talk about green buildings, and they do very good work. LEED, for example, is probably the best known. LEED doesn't really apply to us. It's sort of a set of guidelines in building a building or doing retrofits. But with LEED, they have a more general view of green. Of their 110 points, I think about 35 deal directly with energy consumption and the atmosphere. The rest are sort of water use, indoor air quality, that kind of thing. And what LEED is really for is it's a really great way of a building owner sort of putting some work into a building, bringing it up to a certain standard, and being able to tell the buyer that they've got that value. So it increases the value of a building. It's a ribbon you put on your wall, and it's a very valuable ribbon. We don't need that ribbon because we're going to own and operate the building, so LEED was not appropriate for us. BOMA is another wonderful group, the Building Owners and Managers Association. They actually have some real money for retrofits, and they're making some real efforts. BOMA didn't apply to us because we didn't fit their categories. We're not sort of historical. We're not a factory. We're not a public space. There's 5 categories. We don't fit in them. But more importantly, we're too small. BOMA's after the big fish. And I believe that this building is BOMA certified, silver. I don't know, Dale Martin can probably tell you more about that, or Randall. But this is the kind of building that BOMA's after. We're too small for BOMA, but our lessons apply to buildings of any size, I take it. And then we come to a lot of other kinds of groups like the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority, do a lot of really good work. But now you sort of come up, there's all these sets of standards, and they do workshops, and they have lots of complicated models by which you can look at your energy use and figure out how to change it. And I've talked to a number of people over the past couple of months, and there's this kind of fog, and there's this kind of paralysis by analysis, right? That everyone's trying to figure out the best way to do it, and no one's making a move. So I am going to sort of assert that there's a kind of pragmatic way you can go about this, right? If on my building I wanted to know the payback period of any of these technologies to the second decimal place, which is what they teach you to do at business school. This is best practices from a management point of view, right? That's what a CMA asks of you, and I will not present your idea to the board until you get to a certain point. That's great, but there's an urgency on building retrofits, and I just don't think it's appropriate to get caught up in these second and third order analyses. There's a first order that will do just as well. The technologies I'm going to talk about today are already installed. They're installed in hundreds of thousands of buildings, We know roughly what they will deliver in any given context. You need to tune it a bit with your engineering department to apply it to your building, but we already know what they do. We don't need to go through these enormous feasibility studies to at least take the first step. So I'm advocating not leaping without looking, which I have been accused of doing in the past as well, but looking and leaping at the same time. Right? We know enough about these technologies to make a move. We know roughly what their payback period is going to be. So geothermal, for example, is going to be something in my building. Will the payback be 4.5 years? Will it be 6 years? I don't have the slightest idea. But I know it'll be somewhere in there. How do I know it's going to be somewhere in there? Because there's 600,000 GeoGeo Exchange installations in North America, and that's the kind of energy savings they deliver, right? So I don't need to know if it's between 4.5 or 6. I know it's going to be in there somewhere, and that's worth doing. So I'm I have a new standard, my own I introduced, called the no carbon as a byproduct model. It's very pragmatic, very practical. Platinum would be no carbon at all, and there are buildings that have no carbon emissions whatsoever. It's perfectly possible to do. We could do it with Planet Traveler with a little bit of extra expense. We're not going to yet. Gold would be Planet Traveler. You hit the standard the world needs to hit. Fail would be in the Green Hotel Association. And if there's someone here from the Green Hotel Association, I would love to take some questions after. I will accuse them directly of greenwash in the final slide, and I will explain why. Their work is good, but look, we have a serious problem to deal with, and they're not dealing with it well enough. Not by my no carbon as a byproduct model, anyway. So the basic lessons that will come out of today is that the technologies exist. They're already here. They can stand on their own economic merits. And for Planet Traveler, we did not get a dime in subsidies, grants, low-cost debt. We got nothing. So if we can do it with these technologies and it stands on its own merits in our building, anybody can do it. So the problems that we face are not hard problems in the sense that they're not engineering problems. They are political problems. They are habits, people, motivation, decision-making processes. It's the complicated human decision matrix that needs to be tweaked, not the technology. It's already here. So before I get into some of the technologies, I want to show you the building. A, because we're very proud of this building, and I would love to show you what we're doing. But B, it also gives you a bit of a context, a bit of a feel for the place itself. So when Anthony walked by this building in 2005, I was off in Paris doing some writing, and a very high carbon footprint piece of writing it was, I will admit. He walked by this building. It looked something like this. You can see it's in rough shape. There was fire damage. There was water damage. This is on College Street looking south. So this is just west of Augusta. St. Stephen's Church is on the right-hand side. A shadow of its former self, I wouldn't hesitate to say. The same building looking forward to College, so you can see that it's actually two structures joined together. The back is older than the front. I think the front was built in 1920-something. I might be mistaken. So it's a two-story and a three-story structure. And what we're going to do is we're going to put an extra half-story on the back to make it 3 stories throughout. And we're going to pop a mezzanine on the roof at the front for a rooftop bar and refurbish it to its former glory. This is what it looks like now, roughly. You can see that is a contiguous 3-story space, and it is beginning to look like it probably looked in its days of glory, and you can see the mezzanine popping up the top. All the windows have been rebricked, right? The windows were off, so it was an enormous amount of work. It will be, when it's done, 114 beds. There are 5 dorms per floor of 6 people each, and there are 3 semi-private rooms. There in the basement, there is a lounge and a kitchen and a check-in area and a laundry room. I think Anthony's office is in the basement. And on the roof, there is a rooftop bar, which I don't hesitate to say is the crowning jewel of this building. And I will show you why in a moment. Not just because it's a bar, but. So the interior mayhem that we went through, very briefly to give you a sense of where we're starting from. This is what it sort of looks like in the early days. You can see it's just a shell of a building filled with a lot of stuff. I drove a dump truck for 3 days, taking some of the stuff away. It was very fun. This is what the space looks like cleared out. So you can see the floors are at 2 different levels, right? That's a ramp from the new building to the old building. In the back, we're rebuilding the entire inside structure and raising those floors up. So we're building a shell within a shell. And this is the same room looking backwards, so you can get a sense of the space. And then along the left-hand side of this room will be a hallway. This is what it looks like roughly now. Then there are doors off here going into each of the rooms. all of which have a private bathroom and so on and so forth. That gives you a sense of the space gets divided up, but that's what it looks like before we started. Wonderful old building, a bit rough. The extra half story was a lot of fun. Here we're taking down the roof, again looking towards college, and this is the second story being rebuilt from the inside, so we're building a new shell inside the old, and there's the third story where we're putting on a brand new wall and bringing it up to the third story. I haven't spent a lot of time in hostels. I tended to camp when I traveled, but I have been known to spend a little time at the pub. So my favorite spot is going to be the roof, and you can see here the beginning of the roof as one unit. This is the mezzanine. It's a three-walled glass structure that will hold the bar itself. This is the same structure looking back towards college, and this is the view that you will have while you sup a pint at our bar when it opens in, well, as Anthony likes to say, when the paint dries, damn it. When I keep asking when it's going to be done, September. And I'm trying to figure out, you know, it's a hostel. With this view, I'm trying to figure out how I can sell a $15 martini with the hostel people. So, back to the business at hand. This is a list of the technologies that we considered. And I'll go through each of these in some detail and tell you how they work. The engineering geek in me cannot help but tell you how they work. Geothermal is by far the deepest cuts to our energy use. It's the kind of the team captain. Solar thermal, you grab heat from the sun and heat your water. Solar photovoltaic, you make electricity from the sun. The power pipe, when there's hot water going down the drain, it grabs some of that heat and recycles it. Low LED lighting is very low energy lighting, and some smart switching, some smart thermostats, and of course some good insulation. The ones that didn't make it, green roof, wind, and cogen, which are all good technologies in their own right, and I'll talk a little bit later about why they didn't make it. First, of course, you start with the envelope, and that's not just the insulation, but it's also what's called a heat exchanger. So if you build it like a thermos, you really don't have to put a lot of energy into keeping it warm or cool. And I moved to a condo in Toronto after living in a house for many years. I've moved back to the house, but I moved to the condo thinking it's going to be surely a more efficient way to live in an urban environment. I share 5 walls with my neighbors. So I had a great view, very hip pad, country boy made good in the big city. But I really was motivated because I thought I would use less energy. It's not true. And I found out why the first time I opened my door into the hallway and I was greeted with this massive blast of warm air. There are laws about how fast you have to move heat throughout the building. And a heat exchanger is part of the envelope because every building has to breathe, right? Or else we get sleepy and pass out. So it's how you breathe that's important. That's part of the envelope. So a heat exchanger will make sure that as you push air out of the envelope and bring new air in, you grab some of that energy. And on my condo building, the heat exchanger was, to be perfectly honest, a pile of garbage. Why would they put in a really good heat exchanger? They didn't have to. Who knows anything about heat exchangers when you buy a condo? They're not motivated to do it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that economic gap in a moment. But the insulation and the envelope is where you start. The platinum standard, in my view, is something called a passive house. This was a movement that started in Germany in the late 80s. These are buildings that are so well designed they need no active heating or cooling whatsoever. They are heated by the sun, by the bodies of the people inside the building, and by whatever appliances you have on. And they're so well sealed that you don't need heat. And Germany, this is the original sort of passive house built to the standard. They have a formal standard. Germany has cold winters and hot summers, just like we have here. And this building maintains a comfortable room temperature all year round. It has no heating or cooling. So that's what's possible with just an envelope. You need a lot of southern exposure, right? The sun's coming in those windows. They're just the right size to take heat in during the day, not lose too much at night. The sun lands on something really heavy like cement or rock, so it stores the heat, releases it at night, and you have a really efficient heat exchanger. And that's roughly it. You shade it during the summer. You need a lot of southern exposure. You need space for this. We don't have that here. We have an existing shell that we're dealing with, and we don't have any southern exposure, so we're limited. So we're going to do something like, we're going to spray the interior walls with some high-density foam and put some drywall on it. We have really good windows, and we have a very efficient heat exchanger. So here you see, that brick on the bottom floor is about this thick. It's 2.5 feet thick. It gets a little thinner as it goes up. That's got a lot of good thermal properties. We just want to put one layer inside that. So we're building a shell inside a shell. So without good insulation, I say you don't even Don't even bother with anything else. You're just blowing air out the door. Now, I want to spend some time on GeoGeo Exchange. I didn't know anything about this when I started, and I'm absolutely convinced this is the holy grail of heating and cooling. The reason is because GeoGeo Exchange is not the production of heat. What it really is moving heat around. You're not making heat, you're moving it. So you can move it between the building and the ground, or between the ground and the building. It's done with a heat pump. Heat pump moves heat. We all have a heat pump in our house. It's called a fridge. The fridge takes heat from the carrots and the apples and the milk and puts it into the room. So in the exact same way, the heat pump in a building takes heat out of a liquid, out of the building, puts it in a liquid, you run it through some pipes in the ground, it exchanges heat with the ground, comes back, and you keep doing it. So you're moving heat from the building to the ground, or vice versa. So it can air condition or it can heat. It's just a great big refrigerator that's really efficient, hooked up to the ground. The thing about the ground is that below the frost line, year-round, it's the exact same, roughly, the same temperature. So you can use it to get heat in the wintertime, and you can use it to store heat in the summertime. The trick to it all, once you sort of think about moving heat, there are other ways to do it as well, not just with the ground. The skyscrapers in downtown Toronto in the middle of winter, many of them, believe it or not, are air-conditioned. They're air-conditioned because the sun and the people and the computers and the lights produce so much heat that they have to air-condition it. So imagine taking that heat and moving it down the road and heating a neighborhood. You're just moving heat, right? So once you start moving heat, well, you have a skating rink and a pool in a community center. You take the heat out of the ice and you put it in the pool. This is done all over the place. This is not new, and it works really, really well. I've seen, actually, a heat exchanger. I didn't believe what they could do. I saw a pile of slush that was wet with a little pipe running through it, hooked up to a heat pump. Out of the heat pump came 26-degree air, and the slush turned to ice. So when you talk about moving heat, you're not just blowing hot air around. You're taking thermal energy and moving it. So you can take thermal energy out of slush and turn it into ice and turn it into 26-degree air. It's amazing. Your fridge does it all the time. But the key to the whole thing is the efficiency, right? If you put a unit of energy into a heat pump that is hooked up to a ground loop, you get 5 units of energy out. It's 500%, roughly. That's 500% efficiency. A natural gas furnace, which is the next best bet, is 85, 90% efficient, maybe. So a heat pump is 5 times more efficient than a natural gas furnace. Nothing touches GeoGeo Exchange. That's why I think it's the holy grail of heating and cooling. There's my little diagram of how it would work. And I was so convinced of this, I sat on the roof of the building and I suddenly realized we don't have any ground, we don't have anywhere to put the pipes, and I was quite heartbroken. And when I was heartbroken, I realized just how much my heart was set on this project. And I was looking over the edge of the building, and I suddenly realized, well, we do have land. It's not ours, but there's a laneway that runs beside the building, and it's owned by the city of Toronto. So, wow, I could bury the pipes in the city's laneway. And so I approached the city, and when I announced this intention to various friends, they reminded me of the movie Brazil, and they said, you will end up in Brazil. This is the bureaucracy. This is Toronto, the city hall. The city was one of the most cooperative partners I've ever encountered in promoting and endorsing good clean tech technology. Once they understood what I was doing, which did take about an hour, but once they understood it, the engineer said, why don't you write me a cover letter that tells me what you're doing, why it's good, what carbon it's going to reduce, and I'll use that cover letter to get it through the 15 departments we need to get this through: legal, water, transportation, engineering. The list was huge. And there was no question that that came from the highest level. The bureaucracy embraced this. And when I approached them, I made it even worse. I said, well, not only do I want to do this at my building, I need you to understand what I'm doing, approval from 15 departments. I want you to do it in such a way that we can cookie cut it. So later, other people can come, and they don't have to go through the same process we're doing as we learn it. Let's cookie cut it. So basically, I was asking them to make their workload higher and their days more complicated by doing this for everybody, and the response was, sure, why not? So when we went to City Council to get approval for this, because it's an exception, so we had to get a particular motion in front of Council to get it done, we also said, why don't you set up a task force to look into doing this all over the city? And that's what they've done. So there is now a task force set up, talking to stakeholders, opening up parkland and laneways throughout the entire city. And as far as I know, there's no other city on the planet that has done this, and certainly no one that's formalized it. So the city of Toronto really stepped up and helped us become our own utility, right? Take the heat out of the ground beneath our building. We needed the city's help, and they were right there. Our partner, the provider of GeoGeo Exchange is Clean Energy Developments, who faced the problem, which they didn't really want to face, but I kind of muscled them into it, because at this point I was so convinced of geothermal, I had invested in the company and I sat on their board. They didn't really want to get involved in this building, because not only is there a tight fit in the laneway, which you can see there, it's a messy job, there's the effluent coming out of the holes, there's a sewer, there's a gas line, there's a water line. You've got to aim this drill between all those things, not hit them because your insurance will blow up in your face, and drill 400 feet down and not disturb any of the existing infrastructure. So it was a difficult job. I'm not going to say they were strong-armed into doing it, but the best part of that story, though, is that part of what I'm saying is if we can do it, anyone can do it. Look, if we can put geothermal in this little laneway beside this building, we can put it almost anywhere. Almost any dense urban core can go Geo Exchange. And what do you get from it? You're going to get between 50 and 70% savings on your heating and cooling load, which is roughly 70% of your energy bill. So it's the lion's share of the energy reductions that we're able to achieve. The problem with it, of course, is that it takes money. It's expensive. The difference in cost in our building is roughly the cost of putting the pipes in the ground, $100,000, $120,000, something like that. So you've got to justify that capital, and you've got to come up with that capital. And I'll speak to that issue in a little while. But it pays for itself. There's a way that it's free. Solar thermal, very quickly, I think we know what that is. You take the heat from the sun, you put it into a liquid, you pump the liquid into your hot water tank, you exchange the heat down there. So you're preheating your water. Even in a cloudy country like Britain or a cold country like Canada, there's no reason you can't get 30 to 50% of your water needs from solar thermal. I have to be honest, this isn't our project. This is my project. They've yet to go up, but we're almost there. So I'll go back to my friends from Mondial Energy. I stole this from their website, wonderful little company. They do a solar thermal utility model. So they'll install solar thermal on your roof. You don't pay for a thing. You pay them for the heat that you get, just like you'd pay a utility. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that model later, because I think it's a game changer. So I'm going to say we get 20% of our hot water, roughly. You would think the last thing we would want to do in a hotel that we boast about being so green is light it up at night. But we are going to light this thing up at night, all around the outside. The reason we can do that is we're going to use LED lighting, very efficient lighting, probably 80 to 90% less than an incandescent bulb. You all know the stories about halogens and incandescent bulbs. It's like lighting a campfire for light. You get some light, but what you're really doing is making heat. The only reason you have light is it got so hot. Right? The only reason you get light from a traditional bulb is it gets white hot. That's what the bulb does. It makes heat. It's a very inefficient way of generating light. Plus, of course, now you have to add to your air conditioning load because you're heating the room up in the summertime. So LED lighting is enormously efficient. You have to find ones that look good, right? You have to find ones with the right tone, and it's a maturing industry, and they're around. That's an example of what we're going to put outside our building. At the end of the day, we can light up this entire building inside and out, every single bulb in the building for the equivalent of plugging in a 2-slice toaster. That's how efficient these things are. We are also going to put in some smart switches, so when you walk into a corridor, lights turn on. When you walk out, they turn off. That's the only bit of greenwash that we have, because the payback, I mean, our lighting is so efficient. The switch costs $50. To save $50 in electricity on an LED light, the thing's going to have to be running for 1,500 years. So that's the one part that doesn't really have an economic payback, but it's $50 a switch. And because we're really interested in having our guests be aware of and feel what we're doing in this building, right? We're going to have a little display room in the basement that shows a heat pump and the power pipe, which I'll show you in a second. And it's all going to be on display. I want them to feel the building respond. So it seems important to me that when they walk down a hallway, they see the light turn on. That's worth $50. Solar PV, we know what that is. I would not have put solar PV on this building. This is not our project, obviously. Unless the Green Energy Act came out, I would have used that space for solar thermal. 114 people in the middle of the summer taking a shower. That's 114 hot showers a day. I could put arrays of solar thermal up there and use them all. But at 80-something cents a kilowatt hour, I'm willing to do it. And also, I would just love to sort of go through the experience of getting some of the electricity out of a PV and going through the process of the Ontario Green Energy Act. I think it'll inform me of a lot of things. But it certainly will pay for itself. That's what it's designed to do. That's what the Green Act does. It's called a feed-in tariff. The feed-in tariff is the amount you get paid per unit of energy you produce. And they set the feed-in tariff at a rate such that you do get a payback on your money. That's how they work out the number. So I'm pretty much guaranteed to have my money give me a return with solar PV. I'm going to estimate it'll be 10% of our total power. All of our electrical power, with the exception of geothermal, can probably come off a solar PV array. We've yet to decide how big it is, so that's the one that's a little bit up in the air. I'd like a 10-kilowatt system. Anthony's excited about it, so that's probably what we'll do. Anthony's here, by the way. He's sitting at the back of the room. He's the guy that really knows this project. I wave my arms around and talk about green, but Anthony's the one that knows what he's doing. The power pipe is a really interesting piece of technology, really simple. It's made out of a little company out of Waterloo, Ontario. Just like you want to exchange heat with the air going in and out of a building, you want to do the same with all the hot water going down the drain. So it's just a long, tall copper pipe. And you know when you flush your toilet, the water swirls around? Right? No one knows why it goes one way and not the other. Australian here, Coriolis force or something. But swirl it does. And so when it goes down the drain pipe, it swirls and it sticks to the outside of the pipe. So just gravity fed, no energy. And then you wrap that pipe with more copper piping through which you feed your cold water input. As the cold water wraps around and the warm water goes down, the cold water grabs the heat out of the hot water. And it can grab somewhere between 30 and 40% of all the energy going down that drain. We're a hostel. We'll have 114 showers a day. That's a lot of hot water. If you think we're going to put a lot of hot water down the drain, imagine a pulp and paper mill or a food factory, right, where they have a lot of high-quality heat. Quality heat means high temperature. Going down the drain. Pulp and paper mills put an enormous amount of energy down their drains. And all you need to do is scale this thing up. And that's part of what this company is trying to do. You'll see on the right, there's 4 pipes coming into one. That's a nice little piece of IP they have. An example of a really simple idea that changes things and that can add value to a company. If you don't have 4 pipes, you lose water pressure because you have to put the cold water through such a long pipe that you get a drip out of the tap. They solve that problem and have a patent on that. That's the power pipe. Probably the fastest payback in this building. We have probably 6 showers going into each power pipe. Power pipe costs, what, $1,000, something like that. It's going to save us probably 20 to 40% of all our hot water. So these are technologies that we incorporated. There were some that we did not. Wind we didn't, because in an urban environment, at the level of the height of our building, the air is just too turbulent. It's, you're not going to get much out of it. There are companies trying to address that. Whether they do or not, we'll see. But there's just not a really nice constant supply of wind up there, which is what you need. So we're not doing wind. We're not putting on a green roof. We would rather take the solar energy and use it actively. Right? A green roof essentially protects you from the sun. It's great for lowering your air conditioning bills. But we're far better off putting in solar thermal and solar PV and taking the sun's energy and using it in the building rather than pretending it's not there, which is what a green roof really does. Cogeneration is a wonderful technology. At a nuclear plant or a coal plant, about 2/3 of the energy that you use goes up the stack as waste heat. Same with a car engine. They all run around 33% efficiency, something like that. So all that heat is wasted. The idea behind cogen is you use that heat. You can use it to heat your building. And counterintuitive as it may seem, you can use it to cool your building. They're called heat-based chillers. Doesn't matter how they work, but they work. It's like a propane fridge, right? So cogen is really designed to put the power plant inside the building. And as you produce your electricity, you use all that wasted energy and use it. So it's not wasted energy. So you use the energy to heat your building or cool your building. We didn't choose it. The current state of play of cogen is you need a fairly large building. So this building could be cogen. It could be a neighborhood. It's usually a much larger installation. Although there are now there's something called the Whisper Gen coming out of Norway or Holland, which is designed for a house. It's a little tiny Stirling engine. Stirling engine is an external combustion engine, which means there's no explosion on the inside. You put heat on the outside. Very efficient. And it's about as loud as a fridge, and it's designed to provide the electricity for your home as well as heat it and cool it. It's very promising, but we didn't choose cogen. We chose geothermal because current state, we're too small for this. Now, how much am I going to reduce my energy bill with each of these technologies, and what's the payback? Because sure, they work, but if they don't give you a payback, then what I'm doing is just something that's interesting to me, and there's absolutely no applicability to the economy as a whole. Now again, I can probably do a third-level analysis and get a little more accurate, but I know roughly what these things are going to deliver. How do I know? Because there's hundreds of thousands of these things already installed. I don't need to do the analysis to that level. GeoGeo Exchange would normally reduce a building's energy use by about 50%. I've lowered it to 40 because a lot of our use is going to be hot water for showers. Maybe it'll be 42, maybe it'll be 38, but it'll be roughly 40. Solar thermal, 7.5. Solar PV, about 15. Power pipe, about 7.5. LED lighting, about 5. They add up to just over my target of 75%. So if anybody's got a camera, take a picture of the slide. When I come back next year for round 2, and I have measured the performance of these things, you can put my feet to the fire. And I'm willing to bet you a pint of beer on my bar that I've got it about right. So what's the payback? Well, the cost of all of these things in our building is a little under $200,000. I think that's highballing it, but that's about right. That's about 5% of our building's value. Our monthly savings, and I'm guessing, about $2,500. That's a 15% return or a 6.5-year payback. How do I know it's $2,500? Because I know what the payback is on these technologies on hundreds of thousands of other buildings. So I can work backwards. So I know we're going to get about $2,500. There's two ways of looking at that. One is that 6.5 years is a long payback. There's not a lot of venture money out there with the patience to sit around and get that kind of a return. You can make more money producing T-shirts in China, right? That's where our money goes to. You can make more money making chewing gum or something, right? That's, you know, the economy money will go where it has the highest return. So this is patient money. So that's bad news in a way. The good news, though, is that it's 5% of the building's value, and we all know where we can find that money from, right? It's a mortgage. The commercial banks are not lending very much right now. The commercial banks refuse to lend us anything on this building, to be perfectly honest, with all due respect to CIBC, one of our sponsors today. They didn't lend us a dime. And I have a long and illustrious past with my bank, and I got nothing from them on this building. Nothing. Even though we have no debt on it. So it's a bit frustrating. So I think there is a role for government here. Step up and backstop the loan, right? Have the commercial banks lend the money out, 5% of the value of a building. It's pretty safe money, right? I mean, there's a mortgage on a building. Have the government backstop it so it's only 3 or 4 or 5%. And look, I'm making money on day one. I'm making $2,500 a month. It's only going to cost me about $1,000 to pay the interest on that loan. I'm making money from day one. This applies to any building in this city. I don't care how big it is or how small it is. It will roughly apply. How will we know we made it? Well, we validate, quantify, and justify, and there's 3 ways to do it besides guessing. One way is I look at a comparable building and a comparable use. So there's a hostel down at King and Spadina that's roughly the same size as us. It's a nice old brick building, looks about the same. I need to go knock on the door, talk to the owner, and say, I'll give you all my best practice secrets. Not really a secret anymore, is it? If you show me your energy bill. So that might be one way to do it, and I can do a pretty good estimation of what my energy costs would be under business as usual. The other way to do it is I measure the performance of my equipment. Whatever energy I'm getting out of my equipment, I would have had to pay for, either electricity or gas. Now again, I want to point out something really pragmatic here. If I want to really know what all that equipment is delivering, I'm going to have to do a second or third order analysis, and here's what I mean by that. I'm going to have to know that my air conditioning load is slightly lower because I've got LED lights and take that into account. I've got to look at every single heat pump in that building. There's 27 of them that move heat from one room to another, right? So the bar needs cooling, but the basement needs heating. So I need to measure every single heat pump all the time to know what they're delivering. Well, here's a quick and dirty method of getting around that. I know that the cost of the equipment inside the building is roughly equivalent to business as usual. Air conditioners and a big boiler in the basement. It's about the same, 50, 60 grand, something like that. So the difference in cost was the ground loop. So why don't I only measure the ground loop and look to see how much energy is going in and out of the ground? That's only one measurement, and that's probably good enough to find out whether it was worth doing or not. Anything extra I'm getting in the building from moving heat around is a bonus, right? So there are pragmatic ways of going about measuring the performance of this equipment without getting too lost in second and third order analysis. Solar thermal is pretty simple, right? Measure the flow of liquid and the temperature. You know how much it would cost to heat it with natural gas. Power pipe, same thing. There was a third way, and this was the only grant that we were offered, which is City of Toronto's Energy Efficiency Office or something. It's going to give us $2,500 to model the building's energy use, to find a baseline, right? Because the building was abandoned, so I don't know what I would have been using 5 years ago. So you can use some software and model it. I might take the money. It might be fun to do, but I think number 1 and number 2 is probably pretty good. So I've told you what green is. What is greenwash? The Green Hotels Association membership requirements, greenhotels.com. Now, I am not saying that they're not trying or don't have good intentions, but we are becoming aware now of how much we need to reduce carbon, right? It's not a joke. It's 80%. We got to get on with it. And if I go through the 40 different items or 35 different items they have on their website about what to do to be a green hotel and be accredited, there's only really 2 that deal with energy. One is an occupancy sensor to control the lights, the TV, and the air conditioning. It's like in Europe, right? You got to put the thing in the... Really confused me the first time. And I phoned the front desk and said, my lights aren't working. Are you off? You're from North America, yeah? It's like, yeah. It's all news here. The little sign in the bathroom, put your towels in the tub if you want them exchanged. That's certainly best practices within the bathroom as far as I can tell. But what do you get with that? You get about 5 or 10% savings. So it's nice. It's like Kyoto. It's a good try. But it's not really meaningful in what we have to do, right? Even worse, I don't know, the Hotel Association of Canada, I may be unfair, but their Green Key Eco Rating program, they give you an award 1 to 5. You pay $350 to take an online questionnaire. I didn't pay the $350. I don't think it's, I don't know. And within minutes, you get a congratulatory email saying you are ranked number 1. There's no validation, there's nothing. It's just a questionnaire you fill out. I don't know what that gets you, but that smells like greenwash to me. So again, my point is, if you're not reducing carbon significantly, I mean, no phosphates in the soap is great. Those are problems we have to solve. But if we're not going to solve the carbon problem, who cares? The world will change so much. We wish we were in a day when we worried about phosphates in the soap. So unless you're reducing carbon use significantly, I think it's just feel-good marketing at this stage of the game, given that we know what we have to do. It's not a guess anymore. However, to be fair, there are obstacles to adoption, right? There's reasons why not every building has done this. So I'm going to list what I think some of those reasons are and what I think the solutions are. Europe's really, really kicking our butt in clean tech, and there's a reason for that. They've had essentially a price on carbon since the Second World War. Right? Costs a lot to drive a car there, costs a lot to heat a building. So they have been gearing up to be a low-carbon economy for a long time. And recently, of course, they're adding to that with some pretty strong directives from the European Union and from national governments to tighten up carbon even more. So they're way ahead of us. Here, it's free to emit, right? It's ridiculous. So let's just get on with it, put a price on carbon, and stop messing around. What that means, of course, is that your payback period shrinks, right? If my payback period is 6 or 7 years, and there's a price on carbon that doubles the price of energy, well, now it's only 3 years, right? That's what that does. So the second economic disconnect, I'll go back to my condo building. The heat exchanger on our roof was a piece of garbage. It cost about $30,000. He could have spent $150,000. Why didn't he? Because we know how it works, roughly, right? You put a building up as cheap as you can, making it look as good as you can, and the buyer takes what's on the market. In an ideal world, of course, the buyers will be demanding geothermal, and so who spends their time worrying about that? People have kids and jobs and whatever. You know, this is a dream that we think the informed consumer is going to demand best practices on heat exchangers. So the developers don't pay the energy bills. Why would they invest money in reducing the cost of energy? There's one solution: change the building code. I don't think that's going to work politically. I think it's a great idea, but you're going to get a lot of pushback from a lot of people. There is a way of going about it, though. Imagine something called a geo-utility. So Tridel is going to put up a great big building, or 10 big buildings, and someone comes up to them and says, I will pay for geothermal in all your buildings, the $30 million you need to put for geo maybe even solar thermal, maybe it's all of the technologies, but say it's just geo. I'll pay for the drilling and the ground loops and everything else. But in exchange, I'm a utility, and I get to bill the condo owners. No different from the electrical utility or the gas utility. Right? I'll bring a gas pipe and put gas in. Let me bill your tenants. Same thing for Geo Exchange. So what you need is you need patient money. Right? It generates probably a 15% internal rate of return. Well, what's the most patient money and the biggest pile of money around? It's pension funds. Right? Pension fund could generate a rate of return of 10 or 11%. You got 3 or 4 for overhead. Pension funds sit on tens of trillions of dollars in this country. So you can imagine the Geo Exchange, Geo utility guy coming in and saying to the condo developer, I'll do this for free. Condo developer wins because they get to boast about how great their building is. They don't have to pay for any of it. The owners of the condos can win because the contract can be, I'll charge you for your heating and cooling at natural gas or hydro minus 15 or 20%. So they win. The Geo utility wins because what a great business to be in, and the pension funds win. So no condo developer needs to worry about it anymore. And we can do that for an entire retrofit model. Right? It doesn't have to be just Geo Exchange. Education, if you don't know about it, you won't install it, obviously. That's part of what I'm doing today, but this isn't enough. I think what we need is we need to have strong third-party support of best practices. And by third party, I'm talking about utilities, or I'm talking about the federal government. I see absolutely no problem with ads on TV extolling the virtues of Geo Exchange, telling people that this is what best practices is, so people know what it is and they get excited about it. This pushback is, well, the government picking winners. Well, the government didn't pick the winner. Science and technology picked the winner. The government's just announcing it. Right? Geo Exchange is not the holy grail of heating and cooling because I say it is. It's because it is. It's 500% efficient. So the government providing third-party validation and public advocacy is really important. In Manitoba, they were motivated, both the province and the utility, to sell electrons south of the border. So they wanted to lower their peak usage of electrical power. So they were motivated to get Geo Exchange installed in a bunch of buildings, and they had some incentives. They're not much higher than the rest of the country, but they had a public education campaign. And the per capita rate of Geo Exchange installs in Manitoba, it's either 6 or 9, but it's many times what it is in the rest of the country. And I say it's because people had confidence in the technology. They were told about it by their utility and by their government. Right? What a great idea if you put Geo Exchange in. So lots of TV ads about some of these technologies would be great. Capital, we need lots of patient capital. I've given one example of how we might do it, pension funds. There's another way to do it. Every single property could unlock 5% of their property value at the local bank. If banks are unwilling to lend, the government steps in and says, I will backstop that loan. It's about as safe as loan as you're going to get, right? Backstopping 5% of a property's value, and you're going to lower energy use by 75%. It pays for itself. Why on earth would we not be doing this for every building in the country? But again, we need a central point of contact for this, right? We need the government to get behind this, or the utilities, or some independent third party. The commercial banks can administer it and make their money on the money going in and out of the door. It's easy. Everyone who knows me knows I love green bonds. It's an idea that I worked on at the federal level. I won't get into any detail, but it's pretty simple. It's like a Canada savings bond. So the government issues a bond to pension funds, to the public. They raise money very cheaply because they're the government, right? They're the ones that set the lowest interest rate in the country. So they borrow money really cheaply. The money is dispersed as low-cost debt capital to those people doing retrofits on their buildings. The interest on the bond is paid by the savings. We know the savings are more than the interest rate on the bonds. Why? Because there's hundreds of thousands of these things already installed. We don't need to prove that anymore. And it's administered by the commercial banks. See greenbonds.ca for more details. So I want to make a point now. This is where my two worlds collide. Planet Traveler, my pre-MaRS project in MaRS, that this is really a way of saying that we can power Canada's clean tech industry and economic recovery without it costing a dime. Right? We're just unlocking some of the capital in our buildings, and we're using it for building retrofits, which is labor-intensive, engineering-intensive. Every one of the companies that I profiled here, with the exception of solar PV, is a Canadian company. PowerPipe, Clean Energy Developments, EnerWorks with the solar panels, the engineers who worked on the building. It's all Canadian companies. So Tap 5% of real estate value across the country, unlock it. We will reduce Canada's carbon emissions by 30%. Why do I say that? Every building can reduce it by 3/4, and buildings are 40% of our emissions. We create jobs. We build a Canadian clean tech industry, which is what we're trying to do here at MaRS. Those are some of the companies that would benefit, and that's why these two projects come together for me. Because building a clean tech economy in this country is what I'm trying to do, what MaRS is trying to do. And I think I've given an example of how we can do it quickly, easily, and not have it cost us a dime. Thank you very much. So, yeah, I think we'll take, there's Q&A now, so if anybody wants to ask any questions, I'm more than happy to take them and facilitate a discussion. Peter Love.
Congratulations. I mean, it really is quite spectacular. And I really especially like, you didn't talk much about it, but displaying it and letting the kids, the travelers see it. And I really, because I've seen so many energy efficiency, installations, and one of the real challenges with them is they're invisible. And to everybody else, that hotel is going to look just like the one down on King Street. And it's only going to be different because you're going to show them. And just to talk a little bit more about some of the technologies that people wouldn't be aware of, University of Ontario Institute of Technology out in Oshawa, 300 geothermal wells going down. The whole thing's heated and cooled. Again, people go by it every day, and it just looks like another campus. The Direct Energy Center down at the CNE is a tri-generation plant, and you're right, your hotel's too small for it. So they're making heat, cool, and cooling, heating, and electricity from the plant. Again, no one's ever heard of it. We all go down to CNE, but no one sees it. And just about a month ago, they installed a Stirling engine up at Courtright at the Archetype Center. So it's a house. It's expensive, but it is a very small house-sized cogen plant, and they're experimenting with it to see what it's like. And you're right, today's energy prices, it's not cost-effective yet, but that could change and the technology could improve. But congratulations to you. I really like the way that and I really encourage you to promote it to the people coming. These are primarily young kids, I presume, from around the world, and what a great way for them to see Toronto and come back and talk to people in their family and friends from wherever they're from about this really neat place they stayed in Toronto. Good for you.
Yeah, so Peter's point, for those who didn't hear me in the other room, was about really displaying this technology to the people in the building. One of the things that we're going to actually do is I want to put a billboard on the side of the building, of LED lighting, of course, but it will have a number on it that changes week to week, and it's a number that represents the number of tons of carbon that have been reduced from business as usual by our building, and use that really as a promotional tool. And we're certainly going to have some of the technologies inside the building on display. So one of the power pipes will be in a plexiglass case, and the heat pumps will be at the utility room. Will have a glass wall so you can see it. And no, I think it's a great idea. And there's lots of projects around town that are doing what I'm doing, and then you're right, they're invisible, and it's too bad because we should be loud and proud of this stuff. Yeah.
One of the ways I did some investigation, and one of the ways that we found was one of the easiest ways to get people started is to have an energy monitor, and it's a wireless thing which sits on your bubble outside, and it tells you what your energy usage is at a certain time. And it's actually kind of fun at the beginning because you start flipping lights on and off, then your dryer goes on, and you think, wow, this thing is an energy hog. And within the first month, I cut 10 to 15% of my use. And it really got me interested in thinking about what my appliances use, the lights use, and really starting to make that a permanent part of my lifestyle.
Yeah, so the point is about smart meters, and when you have it displayed to you what power you're using, you tend to change your behavior. And that's been proven time and times again. There was a Kinsey report on how it affected behavior in households. 15% reduction is pretty standard. One of the really neat things that's going to happen with the smart grid is your meter will not just tell you how much energy you're using, but it'll talk to your appliances. And it's called demand control or demand side reduction. But it can be done automatically. So what will happen is the utilities will come to the peak of their production, and they'll send out a signal, and all the air conditioners will start cycling off. And even if you have a dryer running, which presumably in the summer you might not because you have a solar dryer, as my mother would say, but it'll keep tumbling, but the heater will turn off. So in ways that you won't even notice, it will automatically shut down a lot of the energy that you're using. And a study done by, is it Amory and Hunter Levins, I think, are the conservation gurus down in the States, that this automated demand side, if you view it as a kind of supply, right, a kilowatt not used is a kilowatt produced, It's about 50% of our energy supply that's come online since the 60s, and it can probably reduce the amount of energy that we need between now and 2030 by the same amount. So they're called negawatts, they call them. But yeah, and there's a little company here at MaRS called Eneruse, which is producing this really neat little. It's a card. It's about this thick, and you put it on your wall and you plug your fridge through it, and it'll tell you how much energy you're using. And they're going to mail them out to everybody who's on Ontario Hydro or something, and everyone will become aware of these appliances. Yeah.
Tom, you talked about a company that installs solar thermal and then charges the users for the power.
Mondial Energy.
Yeah. Why has not somebody decided to dig holes all over the city and started a geothermal utility?
Well, Clean Energy Developments, full disclosure, I sit on the board and I am an investor. We're trying to do just that. What we need are tens of millions of dollars in capital, patient capital, and there's not a lot of that around right now.
John, can you repeat the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, so the solar thermal photo that I had was Mondial Energy. They're a solar utility. So they pay for solar thermal panels on the rooftops of hospitals and schools and so on, and they charge like a utility. So the question was, well, why isn't somebody doing that with Geo right now and drilling hundreds of holes around town? And my response was, we're trying, but we need a lot of money. So if anybody here knows a pension fund that wants a really great IRR, please put them in touch.
Mondial Energy started with a laundromat.
That's right.
It was a solar laundromat. He had 2 collectors on his roof to do his hot water for his laundromat, and now he's built a solar
Alex
utility.
Winch. Yeah, Alex Winch is a wonderful guy. He's an engineer at heart, and he has a laundromat down the beaches. And I met him, and he really got inside this stuff and figured out how to make it the most efficient and tweak it so you're getting the maximum amount of power for the least amount of money at the right time of day. And when he talks about solar thermal, man, that guy gets pretty excited. But that's what he's doing. He's trying to set up a utility to do that. So, Gio, we're looking to do it. We need some money.
I'm curious about that use of the alleyways and so on, as you're talking about. If you had that as a utility, if a company were to come in to do that, wouldn't that be a problem that they would limit on like public space in order to make cash? So is that an argument that's going to come up in the future?
It's a good question. So the question is, given that we've got the city opening up laneways throughout the city for Geo Exchange, and if a geo utility then started installing these hundreds of holes and pipes throughout those laneways, wouldn't they be using city property to make money? And the answer is yes, they would. But in the same time, I have an agreement with the City of Toronto. It's called an encroachment agreement. I pay the city for the right to have those pipes down there. It costs me about $1,800 a year. Is that right, Anthony? But let's do less than $2,000 a year. So the city is it's a revenue source for the city. So I think the city would benefit. Everyone in Toronto would benefit. But that's certainly something the city has their eye on, and they see it as a revenue source. Yeah.
Why didn't you punch it through your own basement?
I would have loved to have punched it through my own basement. I didn't know of a drill that would get down there.
So you couldn't slant drill it through the
No, that was what I thought we might do, almost through the window or something. But that wasn't. I didn't see a drill rig that was going to do it. Maybe there are though.
Next question is, what's the lifespan of a geothermal?
Nobody knows because they're still going. 25, 50, 100 years. If they're done right, I mean, one of the things that the Geo Exchange Association is trying to do is professionalize that industry. So the question was about why wouldn't you drill holes in your basement? Don't have a drill that did it. Then the question was, sorry, remind me again, I'm now wandering.
How long lifespan?
Yeah, what's the lifespan of a Geo Exchange system? Nobody knows because they last longer than people live. One of the things that unless they're badly built. So the Geo Exchange Association, I mean, Geo Exchange is a mom and pop industry. It's a lot of small shops just doing what they do, and there's not really a set of standards by which this thing becomes professionalized. And the last thing anybody in the industry needs is a leaky pipe, because the word gets around and all of a sudden nobody wants Geo anymore. So the Geo Exchange Coalition is working hard in conjunction with Clean Energy, who's taking the lead on that, to professionalize the industry, essentially make sure there's a standard training program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The point being, if it's put in and it's done right, nobody knows how long they last because none of them's failed yet. So it'll outlast the building. It'll go 25, 50, 100 years. These are polyurethane pipes that they're not metal, they won't rot, they won't rust. Yeah.
You weren't very positive about green roofs. But, the politicians seem to think that that's wonderful ideas. Is it now going to be harder to put in the best technologies in Toronto?
The question is, I wasn't very positive on green roofs, but the politicians seem to be very positive. Well, let's not make it harder. I think you should be, my opinion is I think you should be given a choice. If you want to put up a green roof and that's your choice, go ahead and do it. I think you should be forced to do something. So if we're going to, I think there's a city bylaw that says all new roofs have to be green roofs. I think that the building owner should be allowed to put up solar PV or solar thermal because that is a better use of that sunlight, no question. I think it's a mistake to force green roofs. Government's picking winners. So I think it's a mistake to make every building. I think it's appropriate for some. I think if you have a lot of hot water use, you should be allowed to put up solar thermal. So it's a good question. I think it is a bit of a mistake.
So we need to change public policy?
Yeah, I think so. I think keep it as it is. I mean, the idea that you're going to force someone to make their roof intelligent is great. First step, out of the gate, awesome to see local politicians willing to say that. It's a gutsy move. I just think they should allow a little more choice in what it is that you put on that roof. Yeah.
You didn't say anything about the existing buildings, which is inappropriate or unvisible to try to get the energy from the ground. But what about conservation? Existing buildings, millions of them.
Absolutely. No, the question is about conservation.
You're saying about the occupant sensor control, it's just 5 to 10%. They achieve a lot more than that, but it's not greenwash. It's actually we reduce.
Fair enough. No, the question is conservation is a very strong measure, and that you can get a lot more than 5 or 10% from conservation, and that's not greenwash. I agree absolutely. There's no question. I'm being a bit facetious when I label that, but in terms of what you are capable of doing and still being called green by that association is not much. It's minimal efforts. Best practices on conservation can reduce a building's energy use by an enormous amount. I consider GeoGeo Exchange a kind of conservation, right? You're moving heat around rather than producing it. So, no question, I agree that conservation is a big game. It's not trivial.
First step, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before I turn into steps.
For sure. Insulation, right? First thing you do is caulk all your windows. I mean, there's no question that that's important and a big part of it. My argument was simply that if you're not going to be doing the real thing when it comes to conservation, if all you're doing is putting some towels in the tub, I'm sorry, that's not a green building. That's a green practice, but it's not a green building. And I'm talking about buildings. But your point is well taken. Conservation is not trivial. As the Lovins have pointed out, it's 50% of new energy since the Second World War has been conservation and more efficient use of energy. It's our biggest source of energy is efficiency already. No question. Yeah.
I have a question about carbon and emission taxes, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on why Canada doesn't have one, and what are some of the obstacles? Because
Don't get me started.
Yeah, I know. It's fun to talk about the solutions, and I definitely enjoy the optimism, but there's a sinister, I think, element to what.
No. I think that's fair. So the question is, why doesn't Canada have a price on carbon? What's holding us back? And I can give you a simple answer, and say I can blame it on a particular party. I won't do that though. I think that the political reality of a significant carbon tax. I mean, they got a carbon tax in BC. It's a few cents a liter. That was hard for the public to swallow. The kind of carbon tax that we need is, $25, $50, $100 a ton. We need to double the cost of energy, and politically, that's just not viable. I wish there was an Obama in this country 10 years ago who talked about, if we increase the price of energy, we increase efficiency, we build a clean tech industry. Like, there's lots of economic positives from doubling the price of energy, right? And I think someone needs to speak to that, and speak to that in the way that, that guy can speak and inspire people. And I don't think our politicians were capable of doing that. I don't think that they had the vision that building a clean tech economy can replace, the pain of the increased cost of energy. And like the great Gretzky said, right? You want to skate to where the puck's going to be, not where it is. And we know that peak oil's coming sometime. Why aren't we battening down the hatches, getting prepared for it, right? So I think the politics of it are complicated, and the public pushes back pretty hard when you start talking about prices on carbon, and they're not yet scared enough, to be honest. I think anyway, I'll let that go. But I think it's a great question.
Yeah, it's a pretty big topic, and it's a little bit outside of the current.
No, it's central. It's central. The price on carbon. I mean, hell, my payback periods would be half if we had a good price on carbon. I wouldn't have to have this conversation. Everyone would be doing it anyway. So no, it's absolutely central. It is not an ancillary topic. Andrew.
It's sort of interesting to say it's the politicians' fault. It is in a way, but it's really everybody in this room and everybody on this planet's fault, because we don't care. If we cared, the politicians only do what's going to get them a vote. So if we cared, it would change.
It's true. The point Andrew's making is that, for the other room, is that if we cared, our politicians would care. So it's not enough to blame our politicians. Fair enough, but I also think there's a room for leadership. That's what a politician is supposed to be, and they should not just be reacting and taking polls and testing the pulse of the public. They should be telling us where we're going and helping us get there. So, but I take your point. Yeah.
I see you got a nice compliment from Peter Love. Maybe you could introduce him.
Oh, sure. Peter Love's a superstar of conservation. Peter Love was with the Ontario Conservation Authority, and he's probably the foremost expert in conservation in this province. And I was lucky enough to meet him a couple of weeks ago, and we had on great. I'm glad he's here. So, yeah, Peter Love's a bigger man than I in this field. So, yeah, Harvey.
Tom, during the presentation, you used the word "we need" quite a number of times.
Sure.
And the challenge with "we need" is nothing happens with "we need." What would you say are the one or two most critical things that you would say go out and have as an action for virtually everybody in this room that could start to change things to happen the way you would like to see them?
So the question is, what? I use the word "we need" a lot, and that doesn't get you anything. What are the two things that the actions or items that would be the most effective in getting this kind of change off the ground? I think the first thing would be the government getting behind a public relations campaign and talking about the economic benefits of a clean tech economy, that it's not a downside. Reducing energy use is not doom and gloom. It is creating a new industry. And it's silicon chips in the 1960s. It's a far thinking, it's enriching, it's a new technology, it's wealth. So I think government should get behind clean tech and talk about it in those terms, and I think they should also unlock cheap debt. You know, the kind of money they put to prop up banks should be made available to retrofit our buildings, and that would be very helpful.
Have a liberal province.
Pardon me?
Have a liberal province.
We have a liberal province.
Somebody that presented something on the bond side for the Liberal Party.
I've tried. I've tried. I mean, to be fair, so the question: we have a liberal government. Why haven't they on the province? Why haven't they done green bonds yet? They're focused on the feed-in tariff. To be fair, that's a very far-reaching bill, and I think it's got its faults. I don't think it's important to point the faults out. It is the most proactive and far-reaching piece of legislation on this continent, and I think Dalton deserves, and Minister Smitherman deserves, Premier Dalton and Minister Smitherman deserve all the credit for that. And they don't really want to dilute their message with green bonds. They want to focus on the feed-in tariff, and I think that's great. I think they missed Geo Exchange, but I think it's a great bill, and it's very proactive. I'll go right there for, yeah.
Hi, Bob. Great presentation. Among the building types that are most energy intensive, of course, hotels. We're here in the midst of a lot of hospitals. One of the other sectors, of course, is the industrial sector. What do you see happening in the industrial sector in terms of conservation and green energy production?
That's probably one of the toughest nuts to crack, is the industrial sector. I mean, cement, for example, cement making, endemic to the cement process is the release of carbon dioxide. Endemic to the production of steel is a lot of energy because you got to melt it. So I think those are really hard nuts to crack. There are alternatives to concrete that are coming about. I really think that the only way, and there are ways to improve industrial processes. We have a lovely company here at MaRS called Nimtech, which has an ultrasound device to measure, the content of a pipe and provide a way of making a company more efficient. So there are technologies and ways to sort of approach it, but they're all piecemeal. I think the only way to solve the industrial problem is to produce massive quantities of green energy, to be honest with you.
Opportunity there for somebody in the room.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry. Tom, I noticed on, I think it was your last slide, you sort of had 4 areas, people, practices, politics, and habits?
Yeah, that was an they'll formalize the list, but yeah, people, politics, habits, momentum, decision. I mean, those are just kind of, we can make up a list together.
Right.
Those 4 words aren't that important.
Well, what I thought was important is something that you mentioned at the beginning when you said, well, I knew nothing about this and anything about green building and what it really meant. And I think it's important that people are educated about what green means and what greenwashing isn't. And I think that a lot of us have an inability to do that with any sort of credibility, because nobody's taken the time to really explain it to us. So although the government is unique personal experience that as my habits change, because I have educated myself, and then as a consumer, I now have the power to buy according to what I have been educated on. So I'm actually affecting those changes in the market and forcing companies to provide those types of.
Sure.
So it's like a circle.
Yeah, no question. And so the point made was that as people are educated and businesses are educated, they begin to make best practices choices. Well, MaRS has a wonderful lecture series called Best Practices, and that's certainly part of what we're trying to do is be a part of that education chain.
I think
sure.
it is part of a culture change that organizations or corporations need to take on today, actually, and they're uniquely positioned to be able to do that for all of us.
Yeah, your organizations and big business are uniquely positioned to make change is the point. And for sure, I mean, most large companies now have, at least at the VP level, somebody engaged full-time on sustainability and energy and so on. That's the beginning of that, for sure. Yeah?
So you've achieved an exceptionally efficient level of efficiency here in the building. It's amazing, and I love that. It's also with that produced a hyper-practical and replicable model for others to follow and leverage. So green technologies that exist improve, new technologies emerge, the carbon associated with the production of energies of different kinds changes over time. Have you thought how you might employ some sort of a method or a strategy or system for ongoingly addressing operations as looking at sustainability as an evolution with time, trying to build its life today?
Sure, so the question is, do I and can I look at conservation or energy reduction on an ongoing sustainable basis as technologies change and so on? Absolutely. There's no question that one has to be constantly aware of one's practices and what's available, but infrastructure, like my GeoGeo Exchange system, is not going to get replaced for a long time. So certainly, conservation is an ongoing process in terms of what technologies are available, but the most we can do is do best practices now. And the last thing we should do is say, something better is going to come down the pipe, I'm going to wait. All right? That's part of what I'm saying don't do. So just get best practices in today, because we don't have any time to wait. But certainly on an ongoing basis, things like practices, the way you're running the hotel might be able to change. And you certainly need to keep your eye on that ball. It's not a one-time hit and you're done. But the infrastructure you put in your building has a lifespan of 25 years. So you got to make the right decision. But you also got to move. You got to leap. You can't keep sitting around thinking about it. Yeah.
Oh, great presentation. Just wondering, are you using any software in your hotel to tie in all your systems and monitor?
Some, yeah. Anthony just spoke to somebody the other day. We do have smart thermostats, and I think so. You can control the thermostat from over IP, so from the front desk or from your cottage or wherever. But one of the things that the thermostat does too is it gives the illusion of control to the person in the room, so they can change the thermostat. But they can only go up or down by a couple of degrees. What's the name of that company, Anthony? Do you remember? Okay, so it's smart in two ways. One is that it does give us central access to controlling every individual heat pump, but two, it surreptitiously changes the behavior of the occupants of the room.
One more question?
Yeah.
So you defined your definition of green as energy, but any other thought to other green aspects, green materials, open source?
Very good question. We didn't actually spend a long time looking on building materials. I was interceding in the project enough to get Anthony on board. Anthony's excited about this. I mean, Anthony loves what we're doing, but I wasn't going to start getting in his face about choice of drywall, to be honest, because that was getting.
Yeah, at a certain point, we've got to call a building. Yes. There's the structure is the structure. You have to have strength. You have to have fire separation. You have to have materials that don't melt in fire, pick up smoke. So you're limited to what you can use by the building code.
But I mean, finishes, paints, low VOC, non-vinyl.
We're not there yet. When we're there. We'll look at that a month ahead.
So the question was about building materials and so on. Did I look at that? And the answer was not really.
Okay, Tom, maybe if you have a few minutes to stick around afterward if there's any independent one-on-one questions. First and foremost, I think this is an absolutely exciting project. We're ecstatic to have Tom here at MaRS as our practice lead for Cleantech. One of the themes that came out that I thought was interesting is, awareness and education. And one thing I neglected to mention when I was introducing Tom is he is in the, I guess, the final throes of publishing his book that speaks to a lot of these technologies and their application and their benefits and things as such. And there'll be some sort of grandiose party here at some point. And we'll make sure that for those that are interested, by all means, we'll hopefully get an email out to you so you can be made aware. But Tom, on behalf of everyone here, the people out in the other room, thanks today. I thought it was great.